Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Sunday, December 20th, 2020, 10 a.m. Central, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, it's Sunday. That makes it a rules retrospective day. But this is the last Sunday show of the year. So, the last rules retrospective day. We only have one more show this year. That's tomorrow. Monday at 10 a.m. will be the final show this year. We're going to take 2 weeks off, and then we'll be back January 4th. And in the new year, we will only be doing 2 regularly scheduled shows on Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m. The Monday show will be sort of a outside the game show. So, weekly news and announcements, GM reviews, convention discussion, all sorts of stuff like that. What products are in the works that I'm working on? Products. Offerings, more like, because, I don't know. I like to think of them as offerings to the gaming gods. In any event, the Thursday show will be the show about in-game stuff. World building, cartography, campaign discussion, GMing tips, building adventures, and rules retrospective, like we're looking at today. You know, we've been digging into the first edition AD&D DMG, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, all year. Looking at sections of it under various guises, whether it's just to examine the rules or to note how to apply them in a certain campaign. Or today, I want to kind of take an overview for old school gameplay. Just kind of think about the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules and think about what they mean in regard to old school rules play. If you've been watching the show over the course of this year, since I started it in March, was it March 26th? It was a Thursday. It was the day that GaryCon was supposed to start. Unfortunately, GaryCon had been canceled about a week earlier. In those days, you had to wait until the last minute to cancel a convention because, well, everybody had contracts, everybody had insurance, nobody wanted to take the hit. So, a lot of places couldn't just say, yeah, you can cancel, because they'd lose business and wouldn't be able to claim the loss of business because of, against their insurance because of act of God or whatever you want to call a pandemic. And people couldn't just cancel their contracts or cancel the convention because they'd still have to pay for the space or pay some penalties or fines, whatever was denoted in the contract. So it got to a point where there had to be what they call force majeure. It's a French and also legal term. Perhaps it's from the Latin roots, and it is meant to denote that there is a situation outside anyone's control. Everybody's covered. Nobody is beholden to the terms of this contract, and of course, because things were canceled. If you had insurance, that could, and certainly all convention venues have some sort of insurance in case something goes drastically wrong. Then they can make some claim against that. Now, with any luck, people don't lose their shirts or go out of business over those things. But in any event, GaryCon was the first, I think, of the good-sized conventions that had to cancel. The game store had closed that Monday before, and we had been going for several weeks with limited access to the game space, eventually no access to the game space, limited number of people allowed within the retail space at the front of the store, very rigorous protocols in regard to cleaning and disinfecting after anybody had been in the store and after ourselves when we worked there. So we had gone through that process for several weeks, and it was getting obvious that without the game room, that was so much a big part of our business model, the game store needed to temporarily close. Now, it's 9 months later, and we're still temporarily closed. And that is still true, that it is temporary. And Lake Geneva Games will reopen on the other side of this, barring something even crazier happening. That is the plan. It's what we've been working toward. It's what we continue to work toward. And we will be there at one point. So, that's that, right? Delicious. So what else is the talk of today? This is stuff we're probably talking about tomorrow. What we're going to talk about today, and what we should talk about today, is first edition AD&D overview for old school games. There was a fellow, and his name was David Babbitt. And he posted up on Facebook and the Old School Gaming Forum, I believe, gaming group, Old School Gamers. He's a Facebook friend, and when I saw he posted, I was curious as to what he was posting about, and what he posted was this. It was not just 5 hours ago. That's news from back then. But he posted this publicly on Facebook, so I can share it here. Hey, I need to put together a bullet list of what old school AD&D was about, or should be. I know not all DMs ran it this way, so this is what I got so far. And it's an interesting list. Rulings, not rules. And these are, certain axioms that people will spout from time to time when they want to talk about how to play old school games. Player skill, not character abilities. Heroic, not superhero. Forget game balance, quote unquote, game balance. Immersive gameplay. Role playing, not skill checks. Role playing, not role player. He added that one in later, I think. Dramatic narrative combat, exploration, survival, save or die, henchmen, and resource management. So, I needed to ask him why, and I did, and he said, I'm making a YouTube video for my AD&D campaign. Well, my suggestion was, why not just say what it is? Why not just say what it is to you? I think that is best, and that is the best and only right answer. And I think that's true. Everybody runs games differently. No two games are exactly alike. Some people might both feel comfortable saying they're under the banner of old school gaming. But the truth is, the way they will run games will be very different from one another if you dive deep into the details of how they're doing it. So, looking at this here, I want to do this. So I'm making some adjustments on my side so I can see things more clearly. There we go. There we go. And my suggestions was not rules, not rulings, not rules, is what he said, and I said rules and rulings. I think you need the underpinning of the rules for the vast majority of cases in your game. Players need to know where they stand coming in. If you are just making rulings all the time and they contradict the rules of the game as written all the time, you're going to have a very inconsistent game. And that is going to be very disconcerting for players. You yourself will have trouble constantly keeping track of all these new rules because understand, once you make a ruling, that is the new rule. So once you've decided how something is going to happen in a certain situation, in all identical situations, it should happen that way again. And you could say, well, you can make a different ruling a different time because there's this other factor. Yeah, but then it's not the same situation. So now you're making a new ruling for that same situation with this one added factor. And, this is okay. You can do this. But I am telling you, situations like this, constantly changing, the rulings not being consistent, the rules being countermanded by rulings all the time, is going to be problematic for gameplay. Because at the end of the day, it is a game. And games have rules. And that's why people play them. They play them so that they can compete, or whether it's with each other or with against the game itself. And they want to be able to compete knowing, in general, consistently, what they can expect as they attempt to play this game. And if it keeps changing all the time, at some point they're going to get tired of it. So he said next, player skill, not character abilities. And this I had a bit of a quibble with too. Absolutely player skill. You want players to use their own personal ability, reason, and common sense, and bring that to the table as they approach the game. You don't want players not being engaged or to ignore some of their own feelings in certain situations or their own reason when certain circumstances come up in the game. You want them to apply that. But not character abilities is what David said. In my own games, ability score checks. I use them for a lot of things. People who are playing characters should be able to know that their characters are going to have a fair chance at certain tasks based on their ability scores. And you can't just ignore those in my games. You have to allow people to apply them, or for the DM, rather, to be able to say when they apply and allow rolls for that. And now that could be the DM rolling it behind the scenes. Okay, you're negotiating to get someone to give up some hostages. Well, you're bringing your charisma to bear. What are you saying? You let them role play that game, role play that interaction, and maybe you give some pluses or some minuses based on how they role played that, how they expressed what they were going to say and how they were going to say it. But at the end of the day, the character If a character has a high charisma, they should have a fairly good chance. You may modify their role. If they have a low charisma, they really shouldn't have much of an ability to talk somebody into bending to their will. And yet, overall, the way I run it is player skill and ability score checks. And there are other times when those things come up, and we'll get to that. Heroic, not superhero. Yeah, I got to agree with that. But I would amend that to say heroic, eventually mythic heroes. So I think characters in a D&D milieu, if I can use one of Gary's favorite words, eventually become mythic heroes. They should be able to be so powerful. Oh, yeah. They should be able to rule over kingdoms. They should be able to do great things on many planes someday, eventually, if characters are played that far. Now, some people don't like to play games, D&D games that last into mythic, heroic situations. They like games that are more gritty, more down to earth. When characters get to a certain level, they just soon retire them and start something fresh and approach the game again. But even those characters that retire, if they retire at high level, they should be renowned throughout the land. They should be the stuff of myth and legend, and that's part of what it's about. So superheroes, no, I think that word back then was a little less comic booky. Nowadays, you say superhero, it definitely goes toward Marvel and DC and all the rest. So it's not a good word to use. He says forget game balance. And then I got to say, if you've been watching the show, you probably know Gary had all sorts of reference to balance within the game. And it was implicitly baked into First Edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The random monster tables for wandering monster checks and for how you are creating a dungeon. The fact that dungeons are tougher the deeper you go in them. All of these things are about game balance, and all of that stuff was and always will be part of First Edition AD&D. So I think a lot of people get the idea. There was a concept, and we talked about this one show not that long ago when we were looking at some stuff from the third edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and there was this idea of status quo events or encounters, approaches, versus what was the word? Well, we'll just call them impromptu, on the fly. Status quo being if you create a section of your world and you populate it with certain creatures of a certain difficulty or challenge, then that's status quo. It's going to be that way whether the characters go there when they're first level or when they're third or when they're fifth or when they're seventh. So no matter when, not just the odd ones, even ones too, I'm just jumping ahead. So no matter when they go to this area, what is there is there. And then there's this idea that stuff is tailored. That was the word they used. Tailored toward the characters. So if characters go to a place, they will find a challenge there that is balanced toward their character level and abilities, the number of them, and what kind of equipment they have is going to dictate how powerful they are seen as, or how tough they are and what sort of difficulties they can handle. So you would take all of that into consideration when creating whatever encounters are going to be before them in any particular situation. So the world kind of morphs a bit to keep everything challenging, but not so challenging that it can't be overcome by characters at whatever power level they happen to be. And that's an interesting way to run a world. I think a lot of people, when they talk about game balance, are talking about that. You don't. Everything's status quo. Campaign world is a place where there are tough things over here and there are easier things over there. And if you want to go over there, you will always find the easy things. I don't know that that's. I think you need to do some balancing in there. I think you need to create some things. Certainly, for wandering monsters, you roll on certain tables and you treat it as if it's challenging for them. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's good to have some places that are crazy tough and will always be that way. And if you're first level and you dare go there, well, that's just a shame. But that doesn't mean game balance is not still part of the game. Immersive gameplay. And again, all of this stuff here is my own games. Anybody can run any game any way they like, and it's a legitimate game. Immersive gameplay is what David brought up as the next point. And you know what? He was adding some of these based on what people were suggesting were the sort of tenets of first edition AD&D, old school play. And he wanted to bring that. He wanted to transfer that over too into his other retro clone games. And he wanted to make sure that those rules were honoring these tenets so that he could play with a more modern rule set, but keep the game exciting in the same way that he finds first edition AD&D. Immersive gameplay is a player choice and can vary even at the same table. I'm always torn when I'm playing at a table and one person is speaking completely in a meta way, not getting into their character whatsoever, talking about the game from their own standpoint, and then you'll have another player who's speaking completely in character almost all the time. They hardly say anything that isn't first person, and except for a little bit of exposition to get him across the floor in a room, and then says something else and whatever. So, and then you get those people in between who will speak about their character in the third person and maybe occasionally say something in their character's voice. So you've got a range of different ways of playing the game and approaching how you play a character. And I don't think there's any problem with all of those things to exist at the same table. So if somebody wants to pull back and not be completely immersed in the gameplay, they're not completely speaking in character, or they're not looking at everything completely from their own character's point of view, that's perfectly fine. There are different ways to approach the game, and that's a player choice. That is for them to decide. As far as my table is concerned, there are some games, some people like to run games where everybody's got to speak in character all the time, and if they say anything, then it's something that's being said in game, or it's happening in game if they suggest the actions that they do. So they're always in the game world, and it's very immersive, and that's good. That's a fun way to play sometimes, in my opinion. But I like that mix. I like everybody to be comfortable playing at their own level and in their own comfort zone, but joining in with others who maybe are more comfortable being more immersed. Role playing, not skill checks. Role playing, ROLE, not role playing, ROLL. I think these things are both a mix too. Once again, we're back to ability score checks, role playing, and ability score checks. I think whether those happen behind the screen or you let the players handle ability score checks in some or all situations is up to the DM, but I think they need to be part of that role playing mix, because there will be some players who have, let's say, they're more of an introvert maybe, so they don't like interacting and role playing, and maybe they're not the best with words or whatever, and but they've rolled up a character that has an 18 charisma, and here's a character that should be able to just be the silver-tongued devil and just be able to talk all the time. Are you going to penalize that player's character because the player is wanting to play something that's a little beyond their own personality? What about average Joe playing a wizard who's got an 18 intelligence? Chances are there's nobody at that table with a real quantifiable intelligence of that kind of level. So you've got to allow ability score checks to be part of the mix to make up for that. Dramatic narrative combat. Sometimes, not with all groups, I say. Larger groups, sometimes it's hard to get into that. You can bog down combat. Combat can last for hours, even though it takes only 5 minutes in the game. What was the old joke? D&D where a 5 minute walk, a 5 minute combat can last 5 hours, but a 5 hour walk can last 5 minutes. So, you have to make your decisions. And it could be that your game will fluctuate sometimes. And maybe it's fun to have a whole evening where they do nothing but talk to different people in a tavern. And the characters are picking up all sorts of great information and hooks and leads on new missions, new adventures. And maybe there are other nights where everybody's in a mood to just roll some dice and get knee deep in combat. So you got to honor that. You got to move that along. Exploration, always a player choice. If they want to explore stuff, it's up to them. If they want to create businesses and be in the city and have to vie against the government and the Thieves Guild at the same time while they're trying to make. That's, as long as it's fun for everybody, let them do what they want. Survival is a player goal, always. Absolutely. Save or die. It can happen in AD&D. That's part of the rules. You can certainly mitigate it with system shock checks and extra. You can say, well, maybe you're just in a coma as long as you make at least 1 out of 3 system shock checks. You can change things up so that it's more survivable, but there's something about save or die that creates a certain old school feel in a finality, a lethality to the game that I think people come to expect. And I enjoy it, so I keep that in my game. It can happen. Henchmen. Sometimes, when I have 8, 9, 10 players, I don't often have them go out and hire people and have extra characters to handle because there's already enough taking the limelight off of every other player when any single player is talking or describing what they're doing. So I like to keep that focus a little more narrow, and if you don't have henchmen around, that makes it a little easier. But certainly in smaller groups, I encourage the use of henchmen, hirelings, and others to bulk out a party and make them more survivable. Resource management, well, here's that bugaboo we've talked about plenty of times on this show, and that is I will hand wave a lot of small fry stuff. Early on in the game, when characters are new, every copper, every silver counts when they want to get a meal, when they want to buy some new equipment. But when we get later down the line, I will short form a lot of stuff. If they've already got their regular digs in a town and they're coming back into town to rest up before going out on another adventure, I will quickly say, okay, everybody goes to their respective lodgings and pays their thing, take off the usual, and then you spend the night and you're going to meet back up together when, and let's move it along. Let's avoid some of this bookkeeping, as long as nobody's over equipping themselves or carrying bundles and bundles of swords. Then I don't worry too much about encumbrance, unless there's a situation where they're crossing a plank and it's cracked and it's the more you weigh, the more likely it is to break. So there are certain situations when I'll bring that stuff back in, but otherwise resource management. I like to keep that at bay a little bit and keep a focus on the immediacy of the action. So that's just for my personal taste. Who am I? Well, as of yesterday when I posted this, because I wanted to make sure other people knew the context, I said I just completed my 882nd video for the OK Grognard show since starting last March when the lockdown hit. Most of the shows revolve around my musings of first edition AD&D rules, which I added to my gaming after starting Chainmail and adding OD&D Original Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. First edition was added piecemeal as the books were released over the 3-year period, fully implemented when the DMG came out in 1979. I've mainly run first edition ever since, over 40 years. I guess that's 41, maybe a little longer, coming up soon when we hit 2021. But I'm well aware that not everyone runs it the same way, and there's no single correct way to run it. Always want to emphasize that. I mainly run sandbox games, except when I run one-shot games. The latter are mostly the way I ran convention games until this year, when I ran an homage to the Giant series as a sandbox over the course of 5 sessions at 3 virtual conventions, Greyhawk Con, Autumn Revel, and Gamehole Con. Anyway, perhaps checking out my videos will be helpful, and then I give them a link to the show. Hey, Rick. I see Mandalorian Man. Hey, I will tell you right now, Rick, that Misty won. Misty was drawn for the giveaway. So I've got to dig up a prize. But she's not a gamer. So now I have to figure out something that she will enjoy. And you know what? I've got a pretty extensive movie collection with some duplicates in it. So I'm going to shovel a couple of those your way, along with those dice you won, I don't know, 5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I forget. It's a few weeks ago now. Week 37. Week 38, potentially. Last week was week 37, I guess. But that announcement, usually I wait till Monday, but threw it in the mix today because why not? We're winding it down. You're just in time for the wrap-up. So I will say thank you for popping in. I appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's been following the show over this year. Tomorrow will be my last show of the year. Come on by. Check it out. We'll say hello. We're going to take 2 weeks off after that. But it should be fun. This has been a rules retrospective of first edition AD&D. An overview for old school gameplay. Just a sort of a bullet point checklist of the way I run my games. Certainly things to consider for when you're running your own. It has been a very nice day. Hey, if you're catching up with us on YouTube, thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel and do me a favor. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the videos you're watching. And also, feel free to make comments, constructive criticism, attaboys, pat on the backs, warm fuzzies. Maybe some comment regarding the theme of the show might be more indicative of what you're enjoying about it. So feel free to make comments. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.